Hello again, dear listener. This is Santa speaking gently from beside a warm fire. Imagine my voice as soft as falling snow, calm and slow, meant to ease your mind and quiet the world outside. I see you're still awake. That's all right. Some nights just don't let go so easily. So why don't you settle in? Get comfortable. Pull your blanket up to your chin. Maybe turn down the lights, just enough so that shadows can dance gently across the walls. I've got something to share with you tonight. Not a gift in a box with a bow, but something older, quieter. A story. Tonight, we travel far, beyond sleigh bells and snowdrifts, past chimneys and candlelight, to a land of gold and sand. To a time when gods walked in temples and kings wore the sun upon their heads. We're going to ancient Egypt, but not to witness a war, nor a grand ceremony. No. Tonight, I want to tell you about a pharaoh, powerful, young, and adored, who, one quiet night, just like this one, couldn't sleep. And in his sleepless wandering, he uncovered something far more valuable than gold. But let's not rush. Let's walk slowly, together, through the halls of his palace. Get cozy now. Let your breath slow. Let the day's worries slip down to your toes. You see, even pharaohs can have restless nights. Even rulers whose words build statues and whose eyes silence crowds can feel the ache of a quiet heart. Our story begins in Thebes, the city of 100 gates. The air was dry, but cool. The stars, as always, watched in silence. Inside the grand palace, columns stood tall like forest trunks, etched with the stories of battles and blessings. Carvings of Anubis, Horus, and Thoth glowed faintly in the torchlight. Servants had long since retired. Even the sacred cats had curled up to dream, but one soul remained awake. He lay in a golden bed carved with lotus flowers, surrounded by scented linen and jars of sacred oils. Perfumed breezes drifted through silk curtains. Yet the silence was heavier than any stone block in his tomb to be. His name? We won't say it just yet. Let him be the Pharaoh for now. Not because we don't know his name, but because tonight he stands for every ruler who's ever carried the weight of power in silence. Keeping his name unspoken lets us focus on his heart, not his title. And perhaps in his story, we might find echoes of our own. For tonight, he is not just one ruler of history, but all rulers who have ever stared at the ceiling wishing for sleep. He rose, bare feet on cold stone. The palace floor was smooth from generations of footsteps. He passed through the moon hall, where his grandfather once held feasts to honor the night sky. There were no musicians now, only the whisper of sandals against stone. He looked up at the stars. They shone down through an open ceiling panel, quiet and steady, like sentinels of the night. So many constellations, unchanged for 1,000 years. Did they mock him, or did they remember? He walked slowly toward the Hall of Scrolls, place where knowledge was kept, bound in papyrus and memory. He passed shelves of wisdom, glancing at titles, treatise on crops in drought, the language of birds, dreams and their meanings. That last one made him stop. He pulled it from the shelf. The papyrus crackled in his hands, dry and delicate with age. A memory flickered, of his mother's fingers tracing these same lines as she read to him by lamplight. Her voice steady and warm, long before crowns and burdens. He remembered his mother reading from this scroll when he was still learning to walk. Her voice, gentle as river reeds, had soothed him once. Where had that voice gone? He sat, cross-legged on the cool floor, wrapped in silence, the kind of silence that holds both comfort and sadness. And he read, slowly, softly, whispering words to the darkness as if it might answer back. And somewhere, very far away, I was listening too. And maybe, just maybe, so were the stars. So, are you? Close your eyes if you haven't yet. The story is only beginning. And in Thebes, a pharaoh turns another page still searching for sleep. Thebes held its breath. Beyond the palace walls, the city slept beneath a sky smeared with stars. The Nile shimmered in the moonlight like a ribbon of silver silk, winding through the dark, ancient earth. Palm trees leaned gently in the breeze, and not even the frogs dared croak. It was a night so still that even the gods, if they watched, did so with hushed reverence. Within the quiet alleys of Thebes, faint orange glows flickered from within shuttered windows. Clay lanterns still burned, low, casting soft halos on the walls. Somewhere, a child murmured in sleep. A pot hung cooling over ash. Dogs shifted in their dreams, and all of it, every sound, every sigh, whispered that the world was at peace. But the palace did not sleep. The pharaoh stood alone on his balcony, high above the sacred city. He wore no crown, no gold, just a thin linen robe and a silence, far heavier than any regalia. The stone beneath his feet was cool, smoother than he remembered. Or perhaps it was simply that he had never stood here this long, without company, without duty, without sleep. His gaze followed the river. Somewhere downstream, his people were curled beside cooking fires, under woven blankets, beside loved ones who breathed deeply and dreamed simply. He imagined an old woman sleeping in a clay hut, a boy curled beside a goat, a priest mumbling prayers in his sleep. They all slept, only he remained. A breeze moved across the water and up the palace wall, tugging at his robe like a child seeking attention. He did not move. His eyes were lost in thought, following the flow of water, as if it could carry his mind far enough to escape this waking fog. He remembered what one of the scribes once said, "The Nile never sleeps, and neither do kings who fear their thoughts." Perhaps it was true. He looked toward the horizon, where the black silhouette of pylons and towers met the sky. Temples of gods who no longer spoke. Statues of stone who smiled in silence. What secrets did they hold? Did they too, once long ago, struggle to sleep? His mind drifted to boyhood, when his father would lift him to sit atop the balustrade, the breeze tousling his curls as they named constellations together. Back then, the stars had seemed like companions. Now, they were reminders of all he was expected to be, of all he might never become. He stepped away from the balcony, walking slowly down a corridor lined with lotus-carved columns. Oil lamps burned low in their niches, casting trembling shadows along the sandstone. The air was scented with cedar and old parchment. As he passed the library arch, he paused. Inside, the room yawned with silent scrolls, ancient voices bound in papyrus, lessons from ancestors, warnings, dreams. None of them could ease his mind. Tonight. A tapestry fluttered lightly as he walked by, the image of Ra sailing across the heavens, the god of the sun, the god of waking, of seeing. Pharaoh turned his eyes away. He passed the Hall of Records. The scribes had left ink drying, brush bristles stiff in clay jars. He touched the edge of a desk, its surface smooth from generations, of hands. As a child, he once crept in here at night to watch the candlelight dance. Back then, the world had seemed full of mysteries. Now he knew too much, or not enough. The corridor curved and opened onto the garden court. At its center, a shallow reflecting pool shimmered faintly. Moonlight spilled across its surface, broken only by the drifting petals of a single blue lotus. He knelt beside the pool and stared at his reflection. It looked tired. Not weak, never weak, but worn. a face that carried too many names, too many futures. He picked up a fallen leaf and let it rest on the water. It spun slowly, lazily, as if resisting the current of time itself, a sound behind him, just the soft pad of paws. One of the temple cats. It blinked at him, then curled. Beside his knee, purring low and constant. He reached out and ran a hand along its back. The warmth was grounding. So simple, so alive. He thought of letters yet to be answered, decisions not made. A queen who lay sleeping in the chamber beyond, unaware of his quiet unrest. He wondered if she dreamed of him, or if she too wandered her own private corridors in silence. He did not fear war, nor famine, nor the gods' judgment. What he feared was the stillness, the ache behind his ribs, the vast, unknowable weight of tomorrow. From a distant tower, a gong sounded, not loud, just one soft note to mark the turning of the night. A reminder that time, even when you do nothing, does not stop. And so, he stood. The cat followed. He stepped back into the shadows of his chambers, leaving the Nile, to its endless whisper, and the night to hold its silence. He would not sleep yet, but he would listen. The bed was a marvel, carved from acacia wood, overlaid in hammered gold, inlaid with lapis and obsidian. It was a bed fit not just for a king, but for a god. Sculpted lion legs gripped the floor beneath it. Lotus motifs stretched across the frame. Cushions stuffed with ostrich feathers promised softness beyond measure. Scented linens woven by temple virgins wrapped the mattress in perfection, and yet it could not hold him. The pharaoh lay upon this work of wonder, eyes open to the darkness above. The ceiling of his chamber was painted with the night sky, stars in gold leaf, constellations in indigo. Nut, the sky goddess, stretched above him in celestial arch, but her arms, wide as they were, could not cradle him to sleep. He shifted. The linens sighed beneath him, but offered no comfort. He turned his head to one side, the scent of lavender. To the other, frankincense. He breathed slowly, evenly, like the court physicians had taught him. Still, nothing. Thoughts stirred in the quiet, thoughts he had silenced during the day with rituals, scrolls, and commands. What if the crops failed? What if the priesthood was turning against him? What if his son grew to resent him, as he had once resented his own father? The silence did not answer. He rose and walked barefoot, across the room. The floor was cool, tiled in geometric patterns that told stories only he and the architect knew. He knelt by the incense burner and lit a new cone, cedar and cinnamon. The smoke curled upward in graceful spirals. He watched it rise. It reminded him of his mother's hands, lifting him as a child, placing him gently into this very bed. That first night, the first time he was allowed to sleep in the royal bedchamber, came rushing back. He had been so small. The bed had seemed like a vast sea of silk. He remembered climbing onto it, barely able to reach the pillows, his legs dangling. His mother had tucked him in, whispering something in his ear, something about stars watching over good hearts. He hadn't understood it then. He wasn't sure he understood it now. But the warmth of her voice still lingered, like honey in tea. He returned to the mattress and sat, hands folded in his lap. He remembered being 12, standing before the high priests, reciting lines of the Book of the Dead with perfect diction. They had bowed to him, not because he was wise, but because he was destined. What is destiny when sleep cannot find you? He leaned back against the pillows and closed his eyes. He counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3. But still, the mind wandered. To the gardener he passed this morning who had bowed too low. To the general who had not bowed at all. To the tiny crack in the hallway statue. one he'd never noticed until tonight. He opened his eyes. The stars above stared back. His father used to say, "A pharaoh is not a man. He is a pillar. He does not bend. He does not rest." But pillars cracked, and this one was tired. In the corner of the room, a water clock ticked softly. Each drip echoed like a question. He rose once more and approached the wall niche. There, behind a curtain, rested a small shrine, not to the great gods of Egypt, but to a lesser one. Bez, the protector of sleep, children, and dreams. He lit the lamp beside it. The flickering light danced across the squat, bearded face carved in clay. "Bess," he whispered, "you who chase away demons and sing lullabies to infants, tonight, I ask you to do the same for me." He bowed his head. A pause. The flame wavered. Somewhere beyond the walls, a night bird cried once and fell silent. He raised his eyes again. "I am told a pharaoh must always appear strong," he continued, "even before the gods. But I wonder, little god of dreams, who do you sing to when kings grow weary?" He touched the statue lightly. It was cool, smooth at the nose from generations of fingers. "If you do not come for me," he said, "then perhaps just watch. That too would be enough." Outside, the Nile moved as it always had. Within the palace, time dripped gently forward. He returned to the bed. He did not lie down, but sat at the edge, listening. The water clock ticked. A breeze moved the curtain. The incense thinned in the air. He closed his eyes again, not to sleep, but to rest. And if Bess was watching, perhaps he smiled. The bed was still golden, still soft, and maybe, just maybe, it would finally hold him. If not now, then soon. Very soon. Sleep did not come, but memory did. As the incense faded and the chamber grew cooler, the pharaoh's thoughts slipped backward, not by command, but by invitation. He let them come, slowly, as one might lift an old blanket from a chest, unfold it, and lay it gently across their knees. He saw the desert, not the one sung of in ceremonies, but the real one, vast, harsh, alive with wind and silence. He was 13 when he first slept there, during the great hunt of the southern marches. No marble walls, no feathered bedding, just the sand beneath him, a worn cloak, and the heartbeat of his father beside him. That night had been cold, bitter. The stars had burned cruelly bright above, but sleep had come anyway. Deep, dreamless, earned. He remembered the hiss of jackals in the distance, the low murmur of soldiers tending to fires, his father's voice, rough but calm, telling him not to fear the sounds of the dark. The night does not hate you, my son, the old pharaoh had said. It simply does not care. A hard lesson, but a freeing one. He turned onto his side, pulling the edge of the linen coverlet higher. The golden bed still felt too soft. Another memory. He was 16, in the temple of Heka, the god of magic. His tutors had sent him there for 3 days of silent retreat. No speaking, no servants, no walls between himself and the gods. Each night he'd lain on a reed mat, listening to the wind whistle through the stone corridors. The priests had warned, in silence, the gods speak most clearly. They hadn't, but sleep had found him anyway. Thick, peaceful, uninterrupted, carried on the back of exhaustion and surrender. He missed that. He rose again, not restless, but searching. The floor cooled his feet, drawing some heat from the ache in his spine. Crossing the room, he opened a cedar chest near the window alcove. Inside, simple things. A worn woolen blanket, hand-woven by a village girl in honor of his coronation. A wooden flute he had once tried to learn. a small clay figure of a falcon, chipped at the beak, and a pillow, not royal, not perfumed, just linen stuffed, slightly flattened by time. He carried it to the floor. There, beside the shrine to Bez, the pharaoh laid down. The stone was hard, the air cool, the silence complete, and yet he felt closer to sleep than he had all night. Above him, the lamp flickered once, then steadied, and so he lay, the scent of clay and smoke in his nose. His body curved gently. On its side, his breath slowing. Perhaps this was the answer. Not gold, not prayers, not even comfort, but surrender. Sleep comes not to those who chase it, he thought, but to those who wait quietly without demand. His mind wandered further still, too, the first time he realized his words could cause fear. He had only meant to scold a servant boy for spilling wine, but the boy had trembled and cried when dismissed. That night, he could not sleep. Not because of guilt, but because of the silence that followed, or the night he first heard the high priest argue behind closed doors, whispering that the pharaoh's youth left Egypt vulnerable. He had stood at the top of the stairs, listening, invisible. That night, too, the golden bed had felt like stone. What was sleep, if not trust? What was rest, if not safety? He reached up and adjusted the lamp wick beside the statue of Bess. God's eyes stared back at him, crude, round, strangely comforting. "I am not asking to be a boy again," the pharaoh murmured aloud. "I am not foolish, but I ask for what the boy once had. A moment, just one, where sleep came as a friend, not a task." The breeze stirred again. It rattled a hanging chime carved from thin copper discs. The sound was soft, irregular, like rain that never quite arrives. He thought of his mother's voice, the way she had once hummed while oiling her hair. He thought of his wife, sleeping now in another chamber, likely unaware that he paced the halls like a shadow. Did she ever wake? In the night? Did she ever speak with gods or beg them for rest? He wondered if every ruler in history had sat like this, on the cold floor of a palace, asking the night to carry them. He let his eyes close again. The stone did not soften, but his body stopped bracing. His chest rose, fell, rose, fell. Outside, the Nile moved on. Inside, the flame near Bess danced low, as if mimicking the breath of a man surrendering finally to something he could not command. And just before the drip of the next water clock marked the half hour, just before the curtain stirred once more, the pharaoh's thoughts slipped from words to shadows to dreams. The morning sun had not yet risen, but the palace was already breathing, not with noise, not with voices, but with shifts of fabric, of shadow, of the subtle hum that lived beneath marble floors. Servants walked with silent feet. Guards blinked through the last stretches of night. Oil lamps were trimmed, and fresh bundles of papyrus were placed at doorways like offerings to the day ahead. The pharaoh remained where the night had found him, on the cool stone floor beside the miner, god of sleep. But now his eyes were open, not in defiance of sleep, but in quiet acknowledgement of something more elusive, peace. For the first time in many nights, his mind had not raced forward. It had not dragged him through imaginary catastrophes or replayed the imperfections of the day. Instead, it had paused, not slept, not fully, but paused. He rose slowly, bones reluctant, but not aching. The linen pillow bore the imprint of his head, and the floor had cooled noticeably beneath him. He folded the blanket, returned the pillow to its chest, and with a glance at Bess, still silent, still watching, he whispered, "Thank you. Not for sleep, for stillness." He walked barefoot through the hall of columns, the hush of early morning cloaking everything in soft tones of gray and blue. At this hour, the palace did not feel like a place of power. It felt like a temple, one meant not for command, but for listening. He passed a bronze mirror. The face that looked back at him was not youthful, not glowing with divinity, but something else, human. And in that humanity, something steadier had returned. A memory stirred of the day he was crowned. The crowd had cheered. Incense burned so thick he could not see the sky. His arms had grown sore from holding the crook and flail, and his ears had rung for hours afterward from the drums. Everyone had shouted of glory, of lineage, of destiny. But he had only wanted to sit, to rest, to think. No one had offered him that, because pharaohs do not rest. They do not pause. They do not falter. That was the lesson. But it was a lie, because rest, he now knew, was not weakness. It was wisdom. The sun began to peek over the eastern walls. Its light spilled into the garden courtyard like warm honey, stirring the leaves, setting dew to sparkle on stone. He entered the court and sat by the fountain. Not the central one that sang for guests, but the small corner pool, fed by a thin, copper pipe that gurgled quietly. He cupped his hands, splashed water on his face. It was cold, pure. It chased away the dust of night, but not its lessons. He thought of other rulers, ones long dead, their names etched in fading stone. Did they, too, sit by fountains in early dawn, aching not for power but for quiet? A servant approached at a distance, stopping respectfully. The man bowed low. "My king," he said softly, "your counsel awaits. Shall I tell them?" The pharaoh raised a hand gently. "Let them wait," he said. The servant nodded, understanding more than the words. He stepped back into the corridors. Shadow. And the pharaoh. The boy who once hunted under stars. The youth who sat in silence with gods. The man who had not truly slept in seasons, remained seated by the fountain. In that moment, he was not ruler, not son of Ra, not keeper of laws. He was simply a man. And the crown, though still his, did not press so heavily. Not in this moment. And if that was not sleep, then perhaps it was something better. The beginning of rest. He reached into the fold of his robe and drew out a small token, a flat stone worn smooth by river water. His father had given it to him the night before his coronation. "Hold this when the crown is too loud," his father had said. "It will remind you of silence." He had forgotten it for years, kept it tucked in ceremonial garments. But last week, while changing robes, he found it again. And without telling anyone, he had begun to carry it with him. Not in grand meetings, not in processions, but here, in moments like this. He traced its edges with his thumb. Around him, the palace continued to wake. Birds rustled in rooftop trees. A cook lit the first fire of the kitchen. Somewhere, a guard yawned and stretched against the wall. The pharaoh stood, not with urgency, but with ease. He walked the long outer path that overlooked the gardens, an area rarely used at this hour. He paused at the statue of Ma'at, goddess of balance. Her stone wings opened gently, and her eyes looked forward, carved with eternal clarity. He bowed slightly. "Balance," he whispered, "is not absence of burden. It is knowing when to set it down." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves, as if in reply. He turned back toward the inner court. The day would be full. Petitions, disputes, grain counts, border maps. Faces lined with expectation. Voices offering praise and complaint in the same breath. But this morning, just this morning, he would enter it differently. Not as a man fighting to appear unshaken, but as one who had knelt by a small god and been heard. As one who had remembered how to breathe and as the light spilled wider across the palace stones, a servant opened the chamber doors. The pharaoh stepped through, barefoot still, the echoes of sleep and silence stitched quietly into every stride. And though the crown would rest again on his head soon enough, it would rest, not rule, not today, not in the heart, not yet. Night returned as it always did, quiet, uninvited, and patient, but this time the pharaoh met it differently. He did not resist it. He did not fill the hours with maps or scrolls or the endless calculations of grain and tribute. He walked softly through the west wing of the palace, where the halls narrowed and the torches burned lower, and the silence felt older. Here, the stone smelled of memory, and in this place, beneath faded murals and behind a carved cedar door, rested the royal archive of dreams, not scrolls, not tablets, not histories etched in gold, but voices, stories, memories sealed in jars by generations of priests, rituals passed from dream scribe to dream scribe, capturing what the pharaohs had seen in sleep and dared to speak aloud. He lit a lamp and stepped inside. The room was round, low-ceilinged, lined with niches. Each held a vessel. Each vessel held a name. Some he knew: Amenhotep, Hatshepsut, Seti. Others were older still, forgotten by the world, remembered only here. He passed his hand over one marked with the cartouche of his grandfather. A flicker, a whisper. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in decades, allowed himself to remember what his grandfather had once told him in a voice thick with dusk, "One day, you will dream not of your people, but with them." Tonight, he hoped to do exactly that. He reached for the jar. It was warm, not from fire, but from something else. Presence, perhaps. Or memory refusing to cool. He unsealed the wax lid. A gentle puff of dust and sandalwood escaped. Then silence. Then, faint as smoke, a voice. "You walk too quickly, my grandson. Now you learn to walk slowly." He smiled. Not a hallucination, not madness, just a gift. He sat cross-legged on the floor, placed the lamp between himself and the jar, and waited. The air shifted. The shadows swam. And from the corners of the chamber, voices began to arrive. Not loud, not frightening, just present. As if time had thinned, and all who once wore the crown leaned in to speak. Some sang, some whispered, some merely breathed. But one voice, a woman's, stood out, clear, measured. "I ruled with peace," she said, "and still they carved my name deeper in war." He recognized her, a pharaoh queen, shrouded in mystery, her face erased. From statues, but never from dreams. He bowed his head. "Do they remember?" he asked. "They remember silence more than names," she replied. He let that settle. Another voice rose, young, vibrant, shaken with youth. "I died before I was." "Ready?" the boy king said. "Did you fear it?" the pharaoh asked. "No," the boy replied, "but I feared being forgotten, until I learned we are never forgotten in the place where memory sleeps." The heart? No, the dream. The lamp flickered. Shadows circled him like a slow tide. The pharaoh closed his eyes, and there, in the dark behind his lids, the dream opened. He stood on a shoreline of black sand. The sky above him held two moons, one full, one broken. The river beside him whispered in no language, but he understood it anyway. Across the shore stood shapes, some in armor, some barefoot, some wrapped in linen, their eyes glowing faintly like coals. One stepped forward. It was his father, but younger. "Why are you here?" the father asked. "To rest," he answered. "No," said the father. "You came to remember." And suddenly, the shoreline stretched into memory. Scenes bloomed in the black sand, his first hunt, his first decree, his first betrayal. They played out like fire on water, each flicker sharp, each ripple full of ache and awe, a voice above them all, soft yet infinite. All kings dream, few listen, fewer still wake changed. He stepped deeper into the river. Its water did not wet him. It passed through. It whispered the names of those who had sat as he sat, knelt as he knelt, wept as he now wept. He turned to the moon, the broken one. "What did you lose?" he asked it. It said nothing, but its silence was a song he understood. When he opened his eyes again, the chamber was quiet. The lamp had gone out, but the warmth remained. He sealed the jar, he stood, he bowed to the circle of voices, and in the silence, they bowed back. Then he left the room, slower than he'd entered, carrying not answers but echoes. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. To lead a kingdom with ears that had heard, to hold a crown that remembered sleep, and to dream, not as ruler, but as one of the remembered. The final night was unlike the ones before. There were no restless steps through marble corridors, no incense curling into unanswered prayers, no silent pleas to stars or gods or ancestors. The pharaoh had done all those things, and now he was done doing. He sat in his chamber, not in the golden bed, not on the cool stone floor, but by the window, a modest cushion beneath him, a shawl draped over his shoulders. Nothing ceremonial, nothing grand, just a man watching the moon. D was full tonight, whole, round, bright enough to paint silver across the sandstone walls, bright enough to see the palms sway, the river shimmer, the outline of the statue of Thoth in the garden, head tilted skyward as if listening. So he spoke. "I have remembered what you wanted me to forget," the pharaoh whispered. "And I have forgotten what I once clung to as truth." Silence answered. The same silence that had been with him in dreams, in gardens, in that room of remembered kings. And in that silence, he found something deeper. Peace. He sat a while longer, listening. To the river, to the soft wings of nightbirds overhead, to the creak of wood in the ceiling beams, gentle reminders that the world was still turning even as he no longer chased it. He thought of his son, not the crown prince, not the heir, but the child, the boy who once asked him, wide-eyed, "Do pharaohs get scared?" And he had smiled, kneeling down to meet the boy's gaze, and replied, "Only at night, when the world is quiet enough to tell the truth." Now, the world was quiet again, and he was no longer afraid. He rose, slowly, shawl wrapped tighter around his frame. He made his way to the inner sanctum, not the temple, not the council, chamber, but a small room few knew existed, one carved into the base of the palace, lit only by oil bowls and the slow pulse of memory. This was the room of preparations, not for war, but for rest. Inside were simple things: a basin of water, a set of white linen robes, a stool, a single candle. He washed his hands, his face, his feet. The water was cold, grounding. Then he changed, the linen whispering as it slid across his skin. He sat on the stool and looked at the flame and waited. A servant entered, old, trusted. The man bowed, but said nothing. The pharaoh gestured gently. "It is time." The servant nodded, retrieved the scroll, not of edicts but of final words, and began to read. It spoke not of triumphs, not of lands conquered or tombs built, but of stillness, of balance, of the Nile, of fathers and sons, of stars and stone, of the wind that remembers. And when it was done, the servant left. The pharaoh stood once more. He returned to his chamber, but this time he did not lie on the golden bed. He lay on the floor, beside the cedar wall, where the earth felt closer. He placed one hand on his chest, the other beside him, open. He looked up at the ceiling. Nut, the goddess of the sky, stretched above him. "Take me," he whispered. "Not as ruler, not as voice of the gods, just as your son." And then he breathed in out slower, softer. And when the moment came, there was no fanfare, no lightning in the sky, no rumble from the gods, only the moon watching, only the Nile moving, only the hush of a palace that had at last gone still. In the morning they would find him, face calm, hand relaxed. They would not weep loudly. They would whisper. They would sing, and they would remember that the final crown he wore was rest, and that Pharaoh at last had slept. This was my first time telling you a short bedtime story, but next time I'll bring you a much longer one, a truly special journey worth staying up for. If you enjoy nights like this, don't forget to support my channel, so we can meet again, by the gentle firelight, beneath the quiet stars, inside the calm of our dreams,